Qui-Gon Jinn was the father figure that Anakin needed. I believe had he survived, Anakin would be able to confide in him in all of his problems, whether it was wanting more power, the ability to save others from death, or just venting to him about the problems that he may have, about missing his mother, for example. When he would tell Obi-Wan the same thing, Obi-Wan would just discard of it and tell him to not worry about it and to be mindful of his thoughts. When Anakin went to Yoda regarding Padme's death, of course not telling him that it was Padme that he was worried about, but rather someone close to him, Yoda essentially just told him to not mourn those who die. I believe Qui-Gon would have really been there for Anakin and helped him understand what he could do in these scenarios and situations. I believe they always had a very strong bond, and this always led me to wonder why Qui-Gon never reached out to Anakin once he turned to the dark side, or had any of these doubts in the Force, in the ways of the light side. And today, we have an answer, and it's actually from a very old book, but we're gonna get into it. The novel is called Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno. And now we might be going way back in time here, 4 or 5 years on the channel, when I used to cover a lot from this novel. And there's this one piece that I never actually covered, but I want to cover it today. Now, the book in general goes over what Vader is going through after Revenge of the Sith, as well as Obi-Wan on Tatooine. It's an incredible book that I highly recommend reading or listening to the audiobook. I believe many of the things in this novel will hopefully be utilized in the Kenobi show. Now, there's a scene in the book where Obi-Wan learns about Vader being alive. He learns about this in a cantina from some HoloNet news report talking about a Jedi who survived Order 66 on Kashyyyk. Then Obi-Wan sees a robot man in a black costume, and it's literally written as a black costume in the book, and inquires who this is. When he is told that it's Lord Vader, Obi-Wan staggers back and makes a scene in the cantina as he realizes Anakin is alive and questions many things. So he eventually leaves the bar, his mind in a complete flurry of endless questions, blaming himself for Anakin now turning deeper into the dark side because he left him there to die, left him on Mustafar that is, among many other questions as to where he is, could he beat him again? He actually doubts being able to beat Anakin now because he fears that Anakin is probably so into the dark side and so powerful that it may not be as favorable of an opportunity or a fight as it was last time. Not to mention, Obi-Wan is possibly a little more rusty now. Now, something I want to see in Kenobi is how Obi-Wan is constantly blaming himself for the failure of the Chosen One, for failing Anakin, and essentially being the reason why the galaxy is the way it is. This burden upon him that he wasn't good enough to prevent all of this from happening, blaming himself for the fall of the Jedi and Order 66. Anyways, as he gets all of these thoughts in his mind, he's heading outside and hears Qui-Gon's voice speak to him. He's very surprised, he's very happy, and he responds back to his master until he realizes that he'll look insane talking to himself. So he scurries to an empty alley and continues the conversation, asking him, "Master, is Darth Vader Anakin?" Where Qui-Gon replies, "Yes, although the Anakin you and I knew is imprisoned by the dark side. I was wrong to leave him on Mustafar," says Obi-Wan, telling Qui-Gon that he should have made sure that Anakin was dead. And this also for me is pretty dark. I mean, Obi-Wan didn't kill Anakin, first of all because he couldn't go that dark, he couldn't actually do it, but mainly, and this is explained in the Revenge of the Sith novel, he saw Sidious landing, and he didn't have time to go down the hill, down the high ground, literally, kill Anakin, finish the job, and then try to climb back up without falling into the lava, one, and without Palpatine coming to the top of the hill and killing him. So it's cool that we get a little bit of insight into Obi-Wan actually internalizing the idea of going down the high ground and killing Anakin off. Now Qui-Gon says this, "The Force will determine Anakin's future, Obi-Wan. Luke must not be told that Vader is his father until the time is right." "Should I take further steps to hide Luke?" asks Kenobi. And get this is where it got really juicy for me when I was reading it. So Qui-Gon tells him that the core of Anakin that still lives in Vader clinches to Tatooine as the source of nearly everything that brought him pain. Vader will never set foot on Tatooine, and only out of fear that it'll reawaken Anakin Skywalker within. Obi-Wan exhales in relief and says that he has much to learn from what Yoda told him, and Qui-Gon jokingly, or maybe seriously, says, "You were always that way. which is pretty funny, meaning he always had something to learn regardless of skill or age. And this is also exemplified in the Master and Apprentice novel, where Qui-Gon always sees Obi-Wan as kind of really subordinate. He was reminiscing the times when he was Obi-Wan's age, and he was like, I was so much more capable of doing so many more things, lightsaber combat, force abilities, and Obi-Wan really is just kind of lagging behind. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, mind you, this novel is unfortunately Legends, but it is a beautiful novel, and in my mind, it's canon, but it's Legends, let's not get that mixed up. But in my mind, it is canon because it was written at the time George Lucas was in charge of Lucasfilm, and it got that stamp of approval as being the book after Revenge of the Sith. Now, as for Qui-Gon Jinn talking about Anakin, I can only imagine the amount of guilt that he must have felt as well, to have put Anakin in the hands of the Jedi, then died and left it all to his apprentice, who really wasn't qualified to handle such a difficult student, who was already 9 years old with attachments formed, and he didn't really have the easiest life. He was already a slave, so he probably harbored some anger and resentment towards things. Then again, we have Qui-Gon's typical answer: Anakin's future will be determined by the Force, which is what Qui-Gon always believed. Now, as for him saying that, perhaps he didn't have any concerns. Perhaps this is something he always saw in his mind, that the only way for Anakin to bring balance to the Force is to first muck it all up and stir the pot. But whether he saw that or not, I truly believe that he trusted so deeply in the Force that he knew it was telling him something, and he believed that even in this moment, he sees what Anakin has become and knows that his future, his fate, will be decided by the Force. And eventually it was, and Anakin, did come back. And I also enjoyed how Qui-Gon talks about Anakin and Vader as two different people, because people don't really understand, fans don't really understand that, some fans don't understand how Anakin and Vader were really two completely different people. Vader was always trying to subdue Anakin within himself, and the fact that he was always trying to kill Anakin off and never wanted to go to Tatooine for this reason, as Qui-Gon says, which of course later in canon and now in the comics, he does go to Tatooine, but we learn now that it's a great fear for Vader because he's actually fearful of Anakin awakening, which is something I didn't really ever think of. I didn't think Vader would be fearful of that. I thought he would always just be more resentful and scorn and hateful towards Anakin, or any thoughts of Anakin, or any sort of memories of Anakin, other than Padme, of course. So these are all really interesting plot lines and character developments and things that we're learning through the one and only Qui-Gon Jinn, who can really see into the Force more than anyone else because he's now part of the Force. And I hope that these are going to be implemented, or at least thought of, when it comes to the Kenobi show, because these are really what makes Star Wars. It's not necessarily just the lightsaber battles or the space battles, but it's really the dynamic between the characters, and to understand Anakin Skywalker, who is the star of Star Wars. He is the main character, and the whole entire story of Star Wars is the tragedy of Darth Vader and the rise of Anakin Skywalker, the fall and rise of him. And if you don't believe me, well, it's what George Lucas always said himself. So he wrote this whole thing, so that's why we're all here. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little video. Leave a like if you did, and subscribe if you're new here. Catch you guys in the next one. Until then, remember, the Force will be with you always.